Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hello and welcome to the first edition of What the Bloggers Say. I'm here to discuss this week's chat in the blogosphere, and my guest today is Iain Lawson. If you like and subscribe to our channel, that would be great. So thank you. So this week, what have the bloggers been talking about? So one thing they've been talking about quite a lot is assault on our rights, with various things happening in Scotland, and assault on free expression. So Iain, what are your thoughts on the way the Scottish Government is behaving?
Well, it's quite disgusting. I mean, Nicola had better be careful, given events in Belarus and the international focus now on freedom of expression, the rights of people to express their opinions. It's becoming a much bigger international issue. I've already been contacted this morning by Reporters Without Borders, who are the organisation that defends journalism across the world. And they're getting involved. And of course, next to the events in Belarus, if you were to pick a state where journalism, where bloggers were under attack, you could be pretty confident Scotland would be right at the top of that list, particularly next week, where you've got Craig Murray facing the potential of 8 months in jail. And we've already experienced Mark Hurst and Dave Llewellyn also facing charges. There's no doubt the state apparatus is being used wrongly here in Scotland by a quite despicable Crown Office who seem to be in the pocket of Nicola Sturgeon. And I think she's going to get the international reputation that she's been clamouring for, but perhaps not on the topic she hoped for.
Yeah, I think it's also for women. The freedom of expression for women is really, with the hate crimes bill, it puts women in a terrible situation. And we had this week Marion Miller being threatened with arrest for a tweet. She doesn't even know what was said in that tweet. And this is a chilling effect on women who are trying to stand up for our rights and protect women's sex-based rights. And when we do so, we don't know what we can and can't say, and we might get arrested. So I think this is a deliberate targeting of women to, encourage the others, or in this case, discourage the others, to shut women up.
It's quite intentional, Denise. The whole art here is to keep it confusing. They don't want to be specific about what you can and can't say. They want to intimidate you to say absolutely nothing. And that's why there's confusion. That's why there's vagueness. That's why they won't be specific about what is an offence and what isn't an offence. That's the duplicity that's involved here. And, I very much support those women who oppose a lot of what's going on just now, because women have, over time, had to fight very hard for what rights they have. And it seems quite amazing that, in such a short period of time, just a matter of a few years, you moved from a position where you were getting close to almost equality to a position where you're now going back 50 or 60 years, and it being imposed on you by a woman First Minister. It's quite astonishing, really.
Yeah, well, we've had quite a lot of comments in the blogs about this and about the fact, I think you had one, Iain, where you're claiming Scotland is turning into a fascist state. And people might think that is, exaggerated or hyperbole, but that's how fascism starts. It doesn't start all at once. It starts in this series of small steps. And if you don't have freedom of expression, the government, once it tries to shut down opposition, it goes further and further and becomes more and more authoritarian. And that's what we're seeing here, because I think the government can't win the arguments. So it can't win the argument, so it makes the argument a crime. And then it has to become more authoritarian. And so that several citizens are living in fear. And we do know that some bloggers are thinking of leaving Scotland because they feel that they can't speak out for fear of arrest. So this is the sad situation we're in. And we see Kenny McCaskill had a speech on the freedom of the press in Parliament when he was pointing out the importance of free expression. So that's been a hot topic to date. The hate crimes bill are only going to make it worse, though. That's one of the issues, because although we're saying today we have problems with freedom of expression, with ridiculous charges and being brought against basically independent supporters that don't support the SNP. But how much worse is it going to be when hate crimes are brought in?
Very much. I mean, I have the experience, unlike a lot of people, of actually living in a country where the people were subject to extreme communism. And basically, you know, they had to watch, even in their own homes, what they were saying to their children. Because when their children went to school, the teachers were trained to ask the kids about conversations between their parents in their home. And if anything was said that was untoward, that was passed on. And of course, a knock could come in the door and you could be arrested. And
yes.
I mean, it did happen. And, you know, you're absolutely right what you said, Denise. I mean, fascism doesn't arrive all in the one day. It creeps in. And there's absolutely no doubt in my mind, none whatsoever, that it's creeping in here and it's being used ruthlessly as a political weapon. And whenever I write anything like this, people come on and say, well, that's over the top, that's ridiculous. I go back and I say, well, tell me what part of what I've written isn't true. And you never hear from them again. They disappear, you know, because when they go and look at the article that I've written, they can't find any inaccuracies. I'm writing about events, I'm writing about facts. And, you know, people need to be aware. You know, the people that lived in Germany in the 1930s didn't have any idea what was going to happen once Hitler got established and once all these what seemed small changes all came together in the one plan. And, you know, there's things coming together here in Scotland at the moment, and you've mentioned them. We've got this level of intimidation, this attack on free speech, but it's also been accompanied with the hate crime bill coming in at the same time. And as you say, the confusion about what's legal to say and what's not legal to say. That's a deliberate policy. And the other oppressive measure is the use of the Crown Office and the police to financially penalise people, even if they are eventually cleared when it comes to court. By that time, they'll be out thousands and thousands of pounds against, you know, allegations that are just nonsense from the start.
Yeah, and I think the very disappointing thing is how little support on principle that these people have that have been arrested and charged. So Mark Hurst, Craig Murray, Dave Llewellyn, and Marion Miller. There doesn't seem to be, there should be more outcry from Scottish journalists, the Scottish journalists, who seem to be sitting back and letting this attack happen because politically they disagree with these people. So the Scottish journalists are incredibly weak. And the NUGA, although they were quite good in supporting Mark Hurst, I would have expected more outrage from people that this is happening. So they're letting, you know, the early people get arrested and charged and go through this pain, and people aren't standing up for them. They're not standing up for principle. And that's something that's really disappointing, that we don't have people willing to really stand up and fight for what is a matter of principle, not whether you agree with their political views or not, but the principle of free speech. And nobody in power seems to be willing to stand up for it. Not the only person so far is Kenny McCaskill. in the House of Commons, but no SNP MP, no SNP MSP, no Labour, no Conservative, no Lib Dem, and certainly no Green. None of them. So why aren't they standing up? They're our representatives. Why are they letting our rights be taken away? That's good.
Well, it's much easier to do nothing than to do something. That's the problem. And, you know, we're really relying on the public, the ordinary Scottish citizen. They need to become outraged at this. They need to show their displeasure at this. And only at that stage will those doing this have second thoughts, you know. But, I mean, on the other side, we shouldn't get too depressed talking about this, because there are still good signs. I was able to deliver some seriously bad news to Nicola Sturgeon this week by performing an example that the leaking from the National Executive, despite the removal of all these people to Alba, is not going to stop just because they're gone. And I think the thought priests will be brought back in, and it'll be rubber truncheons and electric light bulbs at the next NEC, because it's still leaking.
Yeah.
But I mean, what a joke that was, you know. I mean, their top investigative powers were put into place, and they identified 38 people who left the SNP to join Alba, you know. I mean, it's just so funny. I mean, there was thousands left, you know. Yes. And they managed to identify 38. And Nicola herself insisted that their names be read out. It was like, you know, the Salem witch trials, you know. Their names had to be read out, supposedly, in disgrace, and they were given the ultimate sanction. You're not allowed to rejoin us. Nobody was thinking of rejoining you, Nicola. You know, you could have made it 20 years. You know, there is no way that was going to happen.
Yeah, I think sometimes her behaviour is a bit bizarre, because, you know, she won. And I think the SNP in winning have been incredibly ungracious. Bloggers have a lot to say about the SNP and their failure to deliver. And I also detect some buyer's remorse out there. I don't see the SNP both votes crowd being exactly enthusiastic and sure. I think they're beginning to have doubts that Nicola is actually going to deliver. The minute she won, she dropped all pretense of a referendum. She palled up with the Greens, who are her new best friends. Everything they were told before the election, vote SNP2 and you get unionists. Yeah, they got unionists. They got a lot of unionists.
They got Super Saturday. That's what they got. They got Super Saturday, where dozens of Tories and Labour were elected. I mean, they were cheering round the country for the Union and St Nicola, you know, because she put them there. No question about it. And you're right, the 2 votes mob have all disappeared. Yeah. They're not crowing about how clever they were, because they weren't clever. You even reached the stage that the result, even though it was a good result for the SNP, was able to be questioned down south, simply because of the both votes strategy. I mean, they're their own worst enemies, unless you take the view that I do, that they do it intentionally. They don't want a runaway victory. They don't want Scotland powering to a fresh referendum when they've not finished the work that they're really there for. And the work that they're really there for is GRA, hate crime bill, and a whole range of wokey policies, nothing to do with independence. In fact, if independence starts to rear its ugly head by moving ahead again, you can be sure they'll have some really unpopular policies ready to push to the front to keep the numbers down. That's what's going on in Scotland. And the sooner folk understand it, the better.
Yeah. Well, I think the blogosphere are definitely like on the SNP's case over the lack of action towards independence. I personally believe that Nicola Sturgeon does everything she can to prevent independence. I'm with Wings on this. I do think the SNP is the enemy of independence. I don't think we'll get independence while this leadership is in place. And as you can see, there are some comments from the blogosphere. So the Wee Detour is writing about the independence movement being hijacked by unscrupulous people masquerading as supporters of independence. I think that's definitely what's happened. I think that it's been infiltrated quite easily by possibly people that are working more for the British state than they are for the Scottish state. And they're very comfortable, and they've managed to, the MPs themselves, if we look at somebody who had a blog out today, who I'm featured, Pete Wishart, people think he's a joke. They laugh at him. They call him comfy slippers and things.
As I think James Kelly was pointing out in his blog, you know, it's encouraging people that are in Alba. It's re-energising people that are in Alba. You know, all this hate and smear and all the insults, it motivates people. It doesn't make them say, oh, well, why don't we all just rejoin the SNP while we can? It's the absolute opposite. Yeah. They're saying, we don't want to be with these people. We don't want to be like these people. And that's why they hate Alba. They now know that there's a permanent party in Scotland supporting independence, driving for independence, that every time they try to introduce some more unpopular woke policies into the SNP, more and more of the more normal members will choose to leave and come and join Alba. And that, there's just, I mean, we shouldn't knock Pete Wishart entirely, because his new name might be the recruiting sergeant, given time. You know, so it'd be quite amusing if he ended up winning, you know, the Attracting Most Members to Alba Award 2021 at the end of the year when we're handing out prizes. But I mean, I despair. I know a lot of very decent people in the SNP, genuinely committed to independence. And I know they, for many years, have taken great pride and shown that party enormous loyalty. So I know they're in a difficult situation, but I know a great many of them who are deeply unhappy, who did not like Nicola's election campaign one little bit, who suspect her very deeply of being behind the allegations against Alex Salmond, who thought the 2 votes SNP attack on Alba was ridiculous. And these people are still in the SNP, but for how much longer? Because a lot of them have just down tools, whereas they were activists. They're no longer activists, but they're not taking the step of leaving the party. I think they're hoping to see a reaction within the SNP to get rid of the folk that are involved in all this nonsense. And if that doesn't come, then they'll give up and they'll move to Alba. But I think that's the period that we're in now. These folk are in a wait and see and hope mode. We'll have to see whether there's enough people with the gumption and the guts to try and overturn them. Yeah. We'll know that in November, when the next conference comes.
Yeah, a couple of things there. Another thing that has been written about this week is the Martin Keaton's case, which I think is at the end. And what Martin has said in his update was that the SNP government, the Scottish government, was the biggest stumbling block, and the Lord Advocate, who was meant to be acting for Parliament, was acting from the government. And the Scottish government actually actively opposed this case, and the case was to find out if the Scottish Parliament did have the legal power to call an independence referendum. So how can we square that? I mean, can people not open their eyes and see what's going on? That all our best chances of independence are being thwarted by the SNP. Plan B that Chris McElhenney, who's gone to Alba, and Angus MacNeil came up with, was refused to be debated, was never voted on, was never allowed to become SNP policy, which it might have. The attacks on this case of the Section 30 case, Alba's supermajority strategy, and also the smearing and attacks on the most effective independence campaigners, Alex Salmond and Joanna Cherry. So if you actually don't look at what they say, look at what they do. And what they're doing is sabotaging any chance of independence. And I think people are beginning to wake up to that, but how can we get other people, how do we get this out to the general public when we're hamstrung by the British media in Scotland that obviously are perfectly happy to keep Nicola Sturgeon in place because they know she's not delivering independence ever. So
it's the message as well, Denise. It's the message. I mean, you've got this ridiculous message that Nicola's trying to promote, that we can't do anything with independence until after the pandemic is over and the economic recovery is all underway. If you believe that, what you're effectively saying there is that the best people to rebuild Scotland after the pandemic is Boris Johnson, the Chancellor, all the rest of them down there in Westminster. It makes no logical sense. If that's the case, and they are the best people, why would you ever want independence in the first place?
Yeah.
Surely if you want independence, it's because you believe your own people, your own countrymen and women are more able to decide the priorities for Scotland, more capable of putting together the programme to recover our economy, our education system, our housing, and all these issues. You know, when I was involved firstly in the SNP, I was awfully proud to be part of it because I knew the SNP were genuinely fighting to eliminate poverty, to bring about better housing, to try and rebuild a country where we retained our wealth and used our wealth to create jobs for our fellow countrymen. I can't say that about the SNP today in any shape or form. The SNP are a power-hungry mob, delighted to do whatever they think they can get away with in terms of social engineering. And it's against the interests of Scotland. It's against the interests of a great many people in Scotland, old, young, male, female, and handing and arguing to leave the power in the hands of Westminster for a day longer than is necessary. It's a complete and utter betrayal of everything the SNP I joined and was an active member stood for. We wanted power for Scotland, not for our own sakes, but for the Scottish people's sakes. And they need to get back to that. And the independence message, whether it comes from the SNP, ALBA, or whoever, needs to get back to those principles, because those are the principles that will resonate with the people of Scotland.
Yeah, and I think James Kelly made that point in his Scott Goes Pop blog, where he said, you know, how are you going to convince people if you've said we need Westminster to get through the pandemic and you're through it? How are you going to convince people that the independence they need, not in Westminster? So I think people are picking up on these messages. The other messages that she gives, you know, like illegal referendums. I mean, why give your opponents the words illegal referendum? Why give the words gold standard? And when Alba was around, she gave the words cheating the system, gaming the system. She gives the unionists their lines. So look at what she says, look at what she does. She's managed to hold off independence for 7 years, and at least another 5 is going to be held off for. So that's 12 years. 12 years in power without delivering independence is really a total failure and a con and on the Scottish people. Yeah, so people aren't too happy with the SNP. We're not too happy, but what is there a good prospect on the horizon? Is there anything to look forward to in the blogosphere? Because the bloggers, to a man and woman, are pretty much despondent and not too happy about, you know, the prospects of independence. Even Peter Bell yesterday in his blog, and he was using the Boxer lyrics from the songs by Simon and Garfunkel about, you know, I squandered my resistance for a pocket full of promises, which is basically what we've done. We've squandered 7 years on a pocket full of empty promises from people that we should not have trusted. But we haven't paid attention, and we've trusted them, and we've misplaced our trust. So is there any impossible good things to come out of the terrible situation we're in at the moment?
Well, I think the only one I would say is that politics can change very, very rapidly. And, even the most talented people can't see, what's coming down the road. I often tell a story about being in West Germany in the mid-1980s. And I was speaking, I met Chancellor Kohl, I met many of the top German politicians and asked them all the same question. Do you think Germany will ever be reunited? And without exception, they all said yes. But they all also added, but probably not in my lifetime. And there I was 4 or 5 years later, watching as the Berlin Wall came down and thinking to myself, all these top people, but none of them seen this happening. Yeah. So, that's the good news in politics. Nothing is fixed. Nothing is certain. Things can change quickly. And we've just got to be ready here in Scotland for when they change, for us to move quickly and to make the most of the opportunity.
The problem that we're not really ready, and this is what maybe Alba can do, is build up the policies. Because the other thing we know about the SNP is they haven't developed policies, and they haven't got an economic case. Even Nicola Sturgeon admitted that, bizarrely, and they haven't articulated the policies to the Scottish people. So one of my kind of fears is, imagine if Boris Johnson says, okay, you can have a referendum in May next year or April, early next year, and it was only the SNP, so not Alba. They don't have policies for it. We're not in any further forward. So surely, we need a party. One of the things Alba could do would be develop the policies, because once we're in a referendum campaign, not that we're going to be in a referendum campaign, let's be honest, but if we were, you register as participant, so anybody can put forward their case, So maybe
one of the secrets in Estonia was they had worked out all their policies. They knew they wanted independence, but they also knew what they were going to do with that independence when it came. And I remember them telling me that what follows independence is a period which is known as a period of extraordinary politics, where the resistance to change is at its lowest. And if you have a set plan, if you do have policies, you can implement them much faster than would normally be possible, simply because that goodwill's with you, that expectation of change is there. And the other thing is, as they developed their policies, they used that as an argument for their independence and why they should be independent. And, people taking a decision about whether they should be an independent or not is a bit of a gamble. But it's less of a gamble if you're being told what the new government of the independent Scotland plan to do once they win that independence. That gives you reassurance. That encourages you to vote for it. You're right, Denise. There's been no policy work in the SNP in recent times. We don't know what currency we would use. We don't have any idea, about whether it would be an EFTA or whatever. Nobody is sitting down, setting out the case for these things. And it's a mistake, but, it's not a mistake if you're not planning to have the referendum. And that's the problem.
Look at what they do.
At the moment, it's not a mistake, but it should be.
Well, I think, for my mind now, obviously being quite very, disappointed that we didn't get a super majority and horrified at the SNP Green government and fully expecting women to be targeted, women to be arrested, women possibly going to jail, and also expecting our rights, women's rights, to be destroyed. So that made me very depressed. And on the independence case, no independence, no prospect of independence. But then I started to think to myself, this has got an expiry date, and the expiry date is May 2026. Because if the SNP haven't delivered independence by May 2026, then surely people will know they're never going to do it. And May 2026 could be a plebiscite election, an independence election, followed by a declaration of independence. And it doesn't matter what Westminster says, we can do that if we want. So I'm kind of getting in my head that The next 5 years is going to be incredibly difficult, but it has got an end date, because May 2026 has to be, if we don't vote for independence, if that's not a plebiscite, if we don't vote for independence, then we can just back up. Basically, it's never going to happen. So, that's my sort of look to the future. Meanwhile, of course, we have her Prince William and Gordon Brown are the new duo, the Save the Union duo. No, is it Prince William? Yeah, I forget who they are.
It's Prince William, yeah.
Prince William and Gordon Brown have teamed up to be a independence busting duo. It's hard to really think that why they need to actually put in the effort, as long as Nicola Sturgeon's First Minister can always just sit back.
I thought he was just contacting Gordon Brown because there's a need for an undertaker. He's yesterday's man. I don't think he's going to influence MD one way or the other. Pensioners hate him. They know that they lied to him. So that's an example. There's a group in Scotland that easily converted. If you just spent a bit of time, told them what the truth was about what happened in 2014, showed them the pensions that other countries round about, similar in size and wealth to Scotland, are giving to their pensioners, they'd be flooding in to vote for us. Yeah. But Nicola's got no interest in that. She's too busy chasing men in dresses.
I don't think she has basically, other than the fact that she stymies independence any chance she can get. She doesn't support the independence movement. She doesn't go on marches or anything like that. She also is incredibly unimaginative on policies. I don't think this is to do with the Constitution. I just think she's quite dull and unimaginative. That's her personality. Because what has she brought in other than the baby box? That's it. Everything that's good really came from Alex Salmond's government, and she's got no imagination of what's going to happen next. And her ministers are chosen for their stupidity and loyalty rather than anything else.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They're not a threat to her because she's very paranoid. So she's made sure she hasn't kind of got anybody that's going to be a threat in the parliament. She's got her best friends, the Greens, that are going to deliver votes for her, and they're not a threat to her, obviously, because they're not in the same party, so they can't threaten her for leadership.
Well, I think
Nicola.
I think, Denise, before I commit suicide here listening to all this, I think we should bring it to a halt at this stage and say, people shouldn't be depressed. Things can get better. They will get better. And I ache for the day when I can write optimistic stories about what Scotland's on the verge of doing. I'm not sure when that's going to happen, but I hope to be around long enough to see it. So,
I think we just have to hope that better days lie ahead.
Well, they can't be any worse, Denise. They can't be any worse.
One of my...
The only way is up.
Yeah, my toast is to the success of our hopeless cause.
Very good. I'll drink to that.
Okay. Bye then. Nice chatting. And right, folks, that was our first edition of What the Bloggers Say and what's been chanting in the blogosphere. If you can subscribe and like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much. Bye.
And a big thank you to Denise and to Iain for that wonderful inaugural show of What the Bloggers Say. Hope you've enjoyed it as much as we did. Please send us your comments and let us know if you any suggestions you have that we can improve the show or change it in any way to suit you. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the little bell so you don't miss another show. And remember, on Sunday, our main show, Through a Scottish Prison, will be on from noon. And my special guest this week is Gordon Dangerfield and Mark Hurst. Don't miss it. Until then, please take care.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.